So the Smarter Digital City survey this year looked at 4 key industries for Hong Kong. That's retail, living, finance and travel. So specifically for finance, one of the things I think that surprised us the most, last year compared to this year, we haven't actually seen much of an improvement in terms of consumer digital engagement with personal finance in Hong Kong. And that's a real surprise, because if you think about Hong Kong, it's a money market, it's a finance centre, and Hong Kongers are actually very good at saving, at banking, and they use personal finance products. But what we saw in the survey is for some of the more complicated products like mortgages, for example, there's still a strong preference to go to the branch and actually deal with a human being. When we look at other types of interactions I think that you have in personal finance, for example, applying for a credit card, it's actually much easier to do that online. So we are seeing that things like applications for credit cards or looking for insurance can be done through technology, but there's still quite a traditional mindset in Hong Kong for consumers, which says that for certain transactions with your bank or your insurer, you want to speak to a human. When we compare finance to travel, travel actually had a major uplift in digital engagement in the last 12 months. So that was a double-digit improvement for the travel industry. Probably that's actually driven by the behaviours of consumers. So we're quite happy to interact with OTAs, we're quite happy to use online check-in, we use mobile boarding passes, etc. So digital technology, particularly the mobile phone, has become very important in travel scenarios and consumer journey. When we look at finance by comparison in Hong Kong, we're just not seeing that kind of engagement. Partly that might be because the applications haven't been there up until this point. So the tools that have been provided by financial services institutions like the banks and insurers haven't been as everyday useful as I think they anticipated them to be, and they haven't got the mass consumer adoption outside of some really spectacular adoption curves like PayMe from HSBC, which now has more than 1 million downloads. But they're not having the everyday transaction use that we would expect. When I compare that to other markets, if I go home, for example, to Australia, I haven't actually been to a bank branch for 20 years. So, my bank actually went online and got rid of branches a very long time ago. It's a smaller credit union. I do everything either through their contact centre or over the internet. It's either mobile or desktop. And even here in Hong Kong, I continue to work with that bank. They've got my children's bank accounts, and I do all of those transactions online. I never visit a bank branch. So that mindset of actually having to physically go somewhere to be able to do some of these transactions exists in Hong Kong. I think in other parts of the world, what we're seeing is that more and more consumers want the bank to come to where they are. They like the idea of mobile bankers that come and visit you at your home when you really need a complicated transaction, but they also want to be able to interact and move their own money around when they want to be able to do that on their mobile phones. One is that cash is still king. Often I have visitors who come to Hong Kong who remark that they need to get cash before they can get a taxi, and they find that unusual. There are very few places in the world where they can't either use a mobile phone or a credit card for some of the basic transactions, and we still do have a lot of cash-only institutions here. I think the second one in Hong Kong, which is unusual, is the prevalence of cheques. I think when I travel around the world and go to an ATM, Hong Kong is probably the only place that I go and I see two things. One is a cheque machine to actually be able to take cheques, and the other one is a passbook update machine alongside ATMs. Now, this is quite unusual in other parts of the world. You don't see these kinds of traditional transactions anymore, and I think it's one of those things about the mindset of Hong Kong that we still have this love of cash and a love of paper and physical transactions, as opposed to really putting our trust into digital. And the institutions like the banks, etc., have a little bit of work yet to do to convince consumers that the digital channel is as trustworthy as all of their other channels.